All right, thanks, Paul. Real quickly, thank you to Steve, Ryan, Thompson, and Paul for take time out of their schedule to go through this panel. Hopefully, it's productive and useful for everybody listening. We did it on the curve a couple days ago, and the feedback's been really useful and was well received. So I'm sure this is going to be just as great. Ryan's actually on his way to the airport, so thank you for squeezing us in before that. And Steve nursing an injury, so appreciate the fact that you guys are taking the time out of your schedule. So, and people aren't here to listen to me, so all yours, Paul.
Well, great. Well, thanks, Eric. And we have a great panel today talking about the Wattbike and how they use and stuff. And the three guys that I've known for a long time and worked closely with, and especially Steve, I've been for like 15 years, and Ryan about 10 years through the USC Body Computing Lab, and Thompson working with me on the Wattbike through Woodway. So what I'd like to do is have each of them just introduce themselves, talk a little bit about themselves and what they're doing now, as well as how they got introduced to the bike and what they like about the bike. Then we'll get into the conversation. And just real quick, if you have any questions, you can send them to me.
It's a little bit of a mechanical fiasco with my other one.
Oh.
I was like, this thing's a lot harder to run. I was like, is something like stuck? No, it just doesn't have a
Eric,
motor.
I think we have to turn off your, somebody has to turn off their mic. So there we go. Okay, so we'll get started. If you have any questions, send me the questions during, or raise your hand, and we can get you involved in the discussion as well. So Thompson, are you still there? Did we lose Thompson?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, great. I just don't see your video. But anyways, why don't you start us off? Just introduce yourself, and then just give us a little feedback on how you got introduced to the bike.
Yeah, so my name is Thomson Remo. I'm the Wattbike master trainer and product specialist with Woodway USA. I come from a pretty extensive cycling background across just about every cycling discipline: road, track, cyclocross. And then through college, I got into strength and conditioning and have been fortunate to work with a variety of athletes through quite a few different sports. With Woodway, I'm fortunate to live pretty close to the facility, which is the North American distributor of Wattbike. So that's how I became involved with this project, and I've been heading up the Wattbike side of this ever since.
Great. And Ryan, how about you? What are you doing now? I know you're pretty busy on the road right now.
No, appreciate you guys having me. Excited to be here. Yeah, Ryan Capretta, founder of Proactive Sports. Started on the team side, worked in the NFL, worked up at Stanford. And now we currently train professional athletes from all different sports. Been doing that since 2006. And we got introduced to the Wattbike years ago through our friends at Woodway. And I'm excited to learn from Thompson and Steve during this. But we've used it in various settings, and it's a great tool that we're excited about. But again, I'm excited to learn more and be here with you guys.
Great. And Steve?
Well, thanks, Paul. Thanks to all the guys at Woodway. I appreciate you having me on this. It's certainly an honor to be on here with these other two great guys, professionals. Most recently, I was senior director of performance with the Washington Wizards in the NBA for the past 4 seasons. Prior to that, I was with the Los Angeles Dodgers as the Major League Physical Therapist for the team. And then prior to that, was with Athletes Performance, now obviously Exos, for 5 years down in Florida, where Paul and I first met each other back in, I think it was 2007. I'm a relative Wattbike newbie. I will tell you, I've used a ton of different types of fan bikes and different types of cardio machines, but have been exposed to the Wattbike more recently, and I'm unbelievably impressed with the technology and the detail, not only from an assessment standpoint, from a training plan standpoint as well. Currently, am working in a little bit of a temporary retirement state and planning out some things for the future. So some exciting things coming for me personally. Live in Northern Virginia with my wife and 3 kids and 2 dogs. So thanks again.
Great. All right. Well, let's kick this off, and we're going to start off with basically over the course here. I'd like to get into just some of the general benefits that we just talked about, but then really start talking about some return to play, then some speed training and programs that the guys have put together, and then maybe talk about assessments at the end before we get into questions. So let's start right off with some return to play, and one of the benefits that I saw when I first looked at the Wattbike, started playing around with it. It was the polar view, and we'll have Thomson give us a little bit more background on this. But then let's like to open the discussion a little bit about how you use this for return to play.
Yeah, so the beauty of the Wattbike is that it provides a lot of data. So there's over 40 different data parameters that are displayed on the bike's monitor and through the additional analysis software programs that we have available. But all that data is helpful if you know how to use it. So it really comes down to being able to train very intentionally. Now, each heart rate intensity that you train at elicits a certain physiological adaptation. Same goes for power. And then same goes for the muscular recruitment that's involved in each exercise or activity that you're doing as part of strength and conditioning or rehab. So when you're pedaling on the Wattbike, if your training adaptation that you're trying to achieve happens at 140 beats per minute for your heart rate, but your athlete's pedaling and exerting themselves at a rate of 160 beats per minute, you're missing the mark. And same goes for power. If the adaptation that you're trying to achieve comes at 250 watts, but you're pedaling at 300 watts, you're missing the mark again. So not only is having good, accurate, and reliable data availability important for determining the proper training intensity, but it helps dictate all of your future training protocol. So we see the same thing coming into play with the Wattbike polar view and some of the imagery that the monitor is able to provide. When you're looking at the Wattbike monitor, you're going to see some shapes that are shown in the images on your screen right now. So you'll see something that either looks like a figure 8, more of a peanut, or an open, almost elliptical type shape. These shapes are force curves. So these are showing how you're applying force into the pedals. And through that revolution, there's a few different phases. When a lot of people think of cycling, they think about just pushing on the pedals, especially if you're not strapped into the pedals securely. You might just stomp on the pedals and do the best you can with what you have available, but you're not getting the most out of each respective pedal revolution if you're not applying force all the way through that 360-degree revolution. So on that left-hand image, you see essentially a figure 8. It's a red image, and if you're using one of the newer Wattbike models, or if you're using the Wattbike Hub app, you will see this image in color on your screen. And if it's red and if it's pinching in the middle, that basically just indicates a push or a downstroke. So there's not much of a pulling phase happening through the revolution, so we're not seeing too much out of the back end of phase 3 or phase 4. It's mostly just a downstroke without any return phase. So if you start to sweep through the bottom of the revolution and start to apply a little bit of transitional power over the top of the revolution, you start to get into an image that looks like that amber peanut in the middle. And that's basically showing that you're on your way to pedaling a little bit more efficiently and effectively. Not quite there yet. There's still a pretty extreme pinch in the middle, but you're at least applying force throughout more phases than just that second phase of the revolution. Now, when we get to the third image on the right, that open, green, almost ellipse type shape, that's basically showing about a 70% push and a 30% pull with smooth transitions over the bottom and the top. And those are rough numbers, but generally that's going to create the best index of force effectiveness, or essentially it's going to lead to the best mechanical efficiency when pedaling, so you can produce the most power with the least amount of effort. So the Wattbike can be used in a lot of different ways, and we'll go into that pretty deeply here on the rehab side of things. But ultimately, this allows you to see where the pressure is being applied into the pedals to dictate the muscular recruitment that you're seeing from riding. So if you're trying to force emphasis onto the quads or the pushing muscles, it's pretty easy to do that just by pushing hard, and you'll see that replicated in the image on the left. If you want to force a little bit more stress onto the hamstring, into the tibialis anterior, dorsiflexors, hip flexors, you'll start to see that opening up a little bit in that middle image, the amber one. And then if you're really pedaling smoothly and creating a relatively natural and even force distribution throughout that entire revolution, you're going to see something like the green image, which is a replica of an elite cyclist pedal stroke on the right-hand side.
That's great. So, like, for Steve and Ryan, just using it with your athletes coming back to return to play, have you had certain case studies that you've seen working with athletes and things that you would actually point out to an athlete or seek different progressions with this? I actually had a question come in already. It's like somebody's like, how would you actually use this for someone with an ankle sprain, return to play, obviously trying to reduce the load on the athlete. So that's why they're putting on a bike. So any thoughts on that? Steve?
Sure. Yeah, I can step in and go first. Yeah, I mean, for an ankle sprain or any lower extremity injury, I mean, I think one thing, and Thomson may have mentioned this, and but we could certainly talk about it more. I mean, it's obvious that this polar view gives you the ability to look at left versus right. So my understanding is that the left of that, the left half of that circle is obviously the left lower extremity, and the right half of that circle is the right lower extremity. So if you're seeing if you're seeing a significant asymmetry left versus right, there's a visual graphical representation there for the client or for the athlete to be able to see, and for you to be able to help coach them to become more symmetrical. One of the other nice things about it from a return to play standpoint is that it's a 360-degree concentric only recruitment. So you're able to get to work on an athlete's concentric power without having to put them on their feet and put that biomechanical stress on their joints if they're not ready for it at that particular time. There's the two main things that I would say from a return to play standpoint. And I think that the diagnosis is somewhat irrelevant. So ankle sprain, meniscus tear, rehab, hip impingement, whatever the case may be, when the player, athlete, client is appropriate to be on this machine, then the options open up, and it's pretty diagnosis inclusive.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Stephen. I mean, from our side, what we look at is very similar. I mean, number one, the left to right, the symmetry. And for us, if we have any if we have any data that's pre-injury, we always like to just compare the two, obviously. So before putting that athlete into their skill set, like you guys said, from a biomechanical standpoint, we can load them up without really thrashing the joints too hard. So we can push them, and whether it's a short power test or a 3-minute test or any data that you typically have, we're always going to look at just historically, what has that athlete been able to do in the past, and then compare that. And if you obviously see those numbers pretty low, then you can work backwards and try to figure out why that is. But we're going to always compare the pre-injury numbers and the post numbers. And I think with this tool, especially for us, there's so much different types of data that you can look at. And that's where obviously Thomson and his crew excels. But that's what we typically look at, is the left to right, and then just comparing the two data sets.
Yeah, and I see that. I mean, for me, just having working with some athletes, but also even personally, it's more of just that visual to focus on as well. Because I'm sure even just the general population, because I know there's people on here that not everyone's working with athletes on this call. But if you just get on a normal bike and just start riding, they probably don't even realize how much they pull with one side more than the other. So it's just one of those things, even though this isn't going to correct that, it's going to help you focus on it more, so you're not constantly pushing more with one side or pulling, especially if you're not strapped in. So I think that's another major factor that I've noticed over the years using it, is that just quick feedback going, oh yeah, I got to concentrate. It's concentration more than anything else. So anything else that you want to add on that, Thompson, on the return to play?
Yeah, well, I've been fortunate enough to visit Ryan's facilities out in California and watch a few of his athletes go through workouts, which included some of the Wattbike. And what we saw on there were massive sprints being put out by some very, very powerful athletes, but they're able to do quite a few of these without any mechanical load. So there's no impact, there's no joint stress. So they're able to get a lot of work done without necessarily seeing the same detrimental effects that you might see from overuse of ground-based training. Now, as you mentioned, Paul, having a secure interface with the pedals is absolutely critical when it comes to getting the most out of this particular movement, just because it is a 360-degree concentric. So even if you're sprinting, if you're only able to apply that sprint style force on the downstroke, you're not going to capitalize on the other 2/3 of that movement pattern. So the more securely you can be strapped in, the better the effects are going to be from any sort of cycle ergometer workout.
Excellent. Great. All right. So Steve has put together some good slides for us on some training. And so I'd like to do is have Steve go through that. There we go. Go through some of his slides that he's put together here. And then just again, Thompson and Ryan, just jump in and with any questions, or anybody else, if you have questions, just raise your hand, because I'd like this to, again, continue to be more of a discussion as well. So Steve, why don't you
Sure.
kick us off here?
Sure. Paul, will you be able to, you'll be able to flip slides for me from your end?
Will.
Okay, great. This may be the medical physical therapist side of me coming out here, but I didn't mention this when we were talking about return to play, but I would really stress, even before we talk about any of these training protocols, please make sure that your client's joint function is as clear as can be before you put them on a bike, even something that's off feet and doesn't have that biomechanical stress. For instance, the ankle sprain example, you want to have full range of motion to that joint and have good joint integrity before you start using these types of tools to test or to train on. So that's just kind of a prerequisite of using these things for sure, in my opinion. But from a training standpoint, and this is largely going to be presented as if I were or you were working with a kind of an explosive repeat athlete like a basketball player. So somebody that has that needs to be explosive and be explosive multiple times within a given time period on the court or on the field. But the goal of these training protocols are really to shift anaerobic threshold to the right as far as we can. So we're going to try to stay primarily aerobic and avoid getting hypoxic and acidotic for as long as possible to stay more efficient and to not burn out quickly. So this is what these protocols will target. I can't take credit for these. These are certainly the work of a lot of really great strength and conditioning coaches and researchers, and all compiled by Charlie Weingroff. And I've essentially stolen some of his compilations and put them on here on the for the presentation. But check out his work if you want to see this, what he's done and what he's put together in his Training Equals Rehab series for sure. So Paul, you can flip the slide. So basically 3 categories of training. The first would be the eccentric heart training, and what we're looking for here is the ability for the left ventricle to basically fill up, to be elastic, to get a large volume of blood into that left ventricle to get pumped out through the entire body. So again, the desired adaptation is to increase left ventricular filling and elasticity, and also to increase peripheral vascularization. This isn't going to make you, these protocols won't make you stronger and they won't make you faster, but they do set the stage for those next phases of training, and also for the clients or the athlete's ability to recover from more intense bouts of exercise. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So 4 different options here, and this is not an all-inclusive list by any stretch, but 4 that you'll see in Charlie's work, and 4 that he and I have talked about over the years of working through this with basketball players specifically. You got obviously your first option there is more of an LSD type protocol, long slow duration, where you're keeping your heart rate at or below 150 or 70%, whatever 70% of your max is. Again, this would be analogous to, if you're familiar with Joel Jamieson's work, to his cardiac output work. The other 3 options there are some type of cyclic repeat. They certainly wouldn't call them an explosive cyclic repeat, but they are cyclic repeats. I don't want to go verbatim through all of them, but each one of them will either have a certain percentage of a heart rate that you need to hit during your work periods, certain reps that you should do for time, or a certain amount of work that you should be doing on a watt bike, for instance, for time. There'll be either a work to rest ratio where you're either, for instance, going up to 90% of your max heart rate on the watt bike and then coasting or stopping entirely until you come back down to 60%. And then repeating that at least for 10 minutes up to 60 minutes on that second example. The third and fourth examples, I may do 40 seconds of body weight squats followed by a watt bike ride at 70% of my max heart rate for whatever 4 times 160 seconds. So that 1 to 4 work to rest ratio. And I'll do that and repeat back and forth for 30 to 60 minutes. And then the last option there would be I'm going to ride the watt bike or some other type of machine for 5 minutes or 1 to 5 minutes, and then I'm going to hop off. I'm going to do 20 reps of a push-up. I'm going to hop back on, ride for another 1 to 5 minutes, and I'm going to go back and forth. And then every time I hop off that machine or that watt bike, my exercise selection could change. So I could go push-up, RDL, and then some type of core movement every time I hop off. And we're going to go through that for at least 20 minutes up to 60 minutes. So again, very sub-maximal, but kind of setting the stage both centrally and peripherally for the more intensive work that comes after this with the other protocols. So Paul, you can go ahead and switch to the next slide. So these would be the, again, more of a central adaptation that you're looking for. This is the punch of the heart. So this is, you get all that blood into that left ventricle, and then you want to have that ability to punch, so to speak, right? To eject all that blood quickly and fully into the periphery. This is max effort work. All these protocols are maximal effort work. The thing that you need to, that I think is important to mention with this is that in order for you to repeat these bouts of max effort work, you've got to set the stage physiologically with the eccentric protocols that we just got done and that we just talked about from a recovery standpoint. Those eccentric protocols will allow you to regenerate those the substrates for the energy that you're going to need for this max effort work. The adaptations you're looking for is you want to increase metabolic efficiency. So essentially, these protocols are allowing you to decrease the cost of doing business, so to speak. So to push off anaerobic threshold to the right, to stave off hypoxia and acidosis in the local muscles. Because they are ultra aggressive and high intensity efforts, you are destroying the peripheral muscle mitochondria. And then the modalities that you could select are there as well. You can go to the protocols, Paul. So again, you're going to see a lot of max or 100% or over 120%, over 100% of maximal aerobic speed in all these protocols. So four options here to choose from. Basically, get a resistance and a cadence on the Wattbike that you can get to your maximal heart rate with, and then recover back to 60, and repeat that 3 to 4 times. This would be analogous to Joel Jamieson's cardiac power intervals. Second one is a killer, 30 to 80 seconds at max effort. So this is very glycolytic, very costly from a training standpoint. You could even go up to 120 seconds at quote unquote max effort. The thing here with these intervals, these repeats, is that you want, unless you want to be a CrossFit athlete, which is completely legitimate, and obviously they are unbelievable athletes in their own right, you want to rest very long in between these bouts. Otherwise, you're literally going to be swimming in the byproducts of metabolism and swimming in lactate. And you're going to have a burn, and you're going to be working on work capacity. And I can promise you that your power outputs each time you do these efforts are not going to be, you're not going to be able to sustain those power outputs. They're going to degrade quickly. So they're very long work to rest ratios, 1 to 10. The third one there, these are what Charlie and I have talked about, and Charlie coined them concession protocols. So if you have professional athletes that you work with, or athletes that are maybe not used to giving quote unquote 100%, you can use these mass protocols or these 10-20 protocols to get the adaptations you're looking for. Although it may not be the best training protocol, you can still work with these. So these would be 10-20 intervals at 120% of maximal aerobic speed, or 20-10 intervals at 110% of maximal aerobic speed, which there's ways you can figure that out on the Wattbike for sure. The other one would be a 10-20 interval where you go 10-20 by 8, so kind of a reverse Tabata type deal there with the 10-20, recover back to 120, and then repeat those 8 bouts up to 30 minutes. So again, key for these concentric protocols, these concentric heart protocols, is max effort, max effort, max effort. And then Paul, the last one you can go to.
And when you're talking about max effort, that's the beauty of when I'm using the Wattbike, is the power and I know it's going to be consistent and it's going to be reliable wattage. So when you say max effort, and that's why you would want that ratio to spread out. I'm guessing is that because I want to make sure you'd rather have the wattage up each time opposed to too much effort or too short of a recovery and not enough effort on each one.
100%, and that's the difference between. I think these would be considered, in my opinion, more performance protocols versus fitness protocols. Fitness protocols, you may do a 30-30 or a 15-15, and you're not going to recover fully. So you're not going to be able to sustain that high level of power output rep to rep to rep. But with these protocols, with the longer rest periods, you have the repeatability to be able to hit those high numbers of those high wattage numbers, or to be able to hit that max heart rate, whatever the protocol calls for.
Excellent. So, okay, so we're going to get into the fiber types in just a second, but any other feedback from either Ryan or Thompson? Ryan or Thompson on these protocols and how you actually using it with your clients?
Yeah, definitely. I can jump in on our side. So with our guys, depending on the sport, if for instance you take an NFL group, we train these guys. We've kind of developed a round concept. So we will typically do 3 rounds. Each round will consist of 4 stations, and we'll bring the Wattbike in round 2 and round 3. And again, depending on the day, for instance, if we're doing a full body workout, we like to do the 6-second power test with these guys and record the data that we get from that, typically the wattage. And that turns into a competition for these guys. And it's really more about the repeats from the weeks. So like as we get into like week 3, 4, 5 of a cycle, we're really comparing the improvements and the consistency of when they hit that interval. So obviously if they're coming off an upper body or however we design it, we want to make sure it's consistent. So I mean, really simply put, we love to see the 6-second numbers. We dabble in some other things, but that's really, we go back to that a lot, and our athletes love competing on that because it's tough as a coach or a trainer to have the ability to have somebody provide a max effort and be aware of their joints and their just the health of their overall body. So we can really have this program that allows them to compete, but make sure it's in a safe setting, if that makes sense. So that's again, we use it in other formats, but like that's our real bread and butter is going back to that 6-second. And certain days we'll hit repeats, certain days we'll get on that one shot. So we'll build up again depending on the time of the off season. But that's something that we really enjoy doing.
So I think that the competition part that always is important as well. So these elite athletes that obviously are pushing. Thompson, anything that you want to add to it? I got a couple questions that come off of this as well that have come in.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. And as you've seen with these protocols that are laid out on the screen, most of them are defined by either percentage of maximum heart rate or speed. That's a great layer, but when you're working with really short duration efforts, 10, 15, 20 seconds at a time, you won't see too much intra-effort heart rate change. Heart rate recovery is certainly something that can be monitored, but by having multiple tiers of data available, so not just heart rate to go off of, but also the power data, it gives you a lot more depth and a lot more specificity with the effect that you're able to achieve. You see a common theme right now in certain sports and certain training protocols that emphasize caloric expenditure or caloric burn as a target for a workout. So let's say doing an effort that allows you to burn 50 calories, but you don't know exactly what physiological benefit you get from burning 50 calories unless you know how quickly that process is occurring, what output you're doing that at, whether it's power or heart rate. So by having some additional data available aside from just caloric expenditure or duration, it gives you much more of a clear and defined target to create a specific physiological adaptation.
Excellent. So one of the questions that came in, I think it would actually fit in with this part right now would be, is there certain things that you would make an adjustment for based on the age group of the athletes? Because they're asking about, 10 to 12-year-old age groups, 13 to 16-year-olds, 17, 19. Is there certain things that you would actually look at to adjust for them?
On our side, absolutely. I mean, because you can adjust the force that is on the bike. So we're not going to have the same force that a 25-year-old offensive lineman is uses compared to a 12-year-old athlete that's not as developed. So I think the capability of the adjustments of the bike naturally provide for that. And again, that's why it's such a useful tool, because you can be really dynamic with so many different populations and so many different types of your off-season and training program, depending on where you're at. So from us, and again, Thompson can probably speak to the specifics of that, but we've been able to adapt this bike to all of our populations, which is awesome for us.
Yeah, well, as you alluded to, Ryan, you can change the amount of resistance that's applied to the bike. And we have power cadence resistance relationship tables that allow you to at least get a rough projection of how much power you'll be producing at a given cadence and at a given air damper setting. So the bike is measuring force in real time via strain gauge, which is something that a lot of other pieces of fitness equipment don't necessarily do. A lot of them use algorithms or a projection based upon a speed of a flywheel to calculate a pseudo power. But the reality of the situation is, unless you're able to monitor that force in real time with a really fast sampling rate and with multiple cadence sensors within a particular revolution, you're not able to get the best power data possible. So because the Wattbike has an incredibly fast force sampling rate, because it has multiple cadence sensors within each pedal revolution, it's able to draw out that real-time force curve, but it also gives you those actual peaks and spikes in power that you can't get from other bikes. They can't capture them quickly enough to actually tell you what your instantaneous peak was. We have software available that'll allow you to evaluate many of the 40 plus data parameters out to 5 decimal places. So if you're doing a 6-second effort, whether it's with an experienced elite level athlete or a young kid, you'll still be able to see exactly where and when they're applying the most power, what it looks like in terms of the image of that revolution with the force curve. And then that'll help you dictate future training if you need to develop the hamstrings or the glutes or any of the other musculature involved in that particular revolution to allow them to create the best power possible.
Great. And so along this, with this, these 2 slides or the 2 programs that you talked about, Steve, now how are you mixing them together? Because are you looking at these as different phases, or are you in a week after you built that base going into this higher intensity? Are you mixing them in during the week, or are they phases over time?
Well, with a professional basketball player, we would pick certain protocols and mix them in in a kind of weekly periodization, a weekly plan. For instance, on a recovery day, we may pick an Eccentric Heart protocol. On a max strength day, we may pick a explosive cyclic repeat, which you'll see in the next slide. Et cetera, et cetera. So there'll be different protocols mixed in on a weekly basis. For a youth athlete, that's interesting. I would tend to be a little bit more. Well, I train and I just take my kids for example. I train all my kids kind of from a concurrent standpoint. So we're working on multiple qualities at the same time, and I have used both the eccentric protocols with them and some of these more aggressive high wattage outputs, high heart rate output repeats with them as well. So.
Okay, great. All right, so we'll go into the next section here. Steve, there we go.
Okay, so this is the last section of protocols that I've got on the slides here. This is more of when you're looking for more of a peripheral muscle fiber adaptation from your work. So again, it's max effort work. To get type 2 fibers to adapt, you need high loads. And because of the interval nature of these or some of these protocols, you are going to kind of avoid the acidotic hypoxic stages that you want to avoid to be able to repeat these high explosive outputs. So benefits would be to increase the local mitochondria and the muscle fibers, improve work capacity, and then be able to maintain a high wattage output with your explosive training. If you have an explosive repeat athlete and you choose, and I'll show you the one particular protocol, if you choose that protocol, it's not going to have much carryover to their sport. That would be the slow high load protocol. And then the one that I didn't list here is more of a lift, and obviously it doesn't necessarily fit in with what we're talking about today. It would be a 2020 or statodynamic type lifts. They would work to increase the number of type 1 fibers. So Paul, you can go to the last slide there. So just 2 protocols here. This, I think Ryan mentioned this with his guys that he trains in his gym. This would be an explosive cyclic repeat. So this, for instance, you could use a kettlebell swing with this particular protocol. Again, if the athlete's got the joints to do it. But 5 to 10 seconds of maximal effort, high wattage output. recovering for 50 to 55 seconds. So essentially full recovery and then repeating. And then continuing on until you see power drop off for 2 consecutive reps. Now, the awesome thing about the Wattbike is that, again, you've got all these metrics right in front of you on your screen or on your phone. So when you're on the Wattbike and you're doing this particular protocol, you're going to be able to see if your power is dropping off for 2 consecutive repetitions pretty easily, and you'll know when to stop the training session. But again, knowing where these protocols were developed for a basketball player, they need to be explosive and they need to be able to repeat those explosive efforts. We're going 5 to 10 seconds hard on the Wattbike. We're recovering almost, essentially a full recovery. And then we're repeating it over and over again. And this will get you some type 2 fiber, type 2 muscle adaptations that are beneficial to, again, push anaerobic threshold to the right. The other one there is this one where for an explosive repeat athlete, probably doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's obviously going to have some peripheral benefits where you're increasing the oxidative function of the type 2 fibers. So this would be 20 to 40 minutes, continuous, super high load on a Wattbike and just crushing it. If you're familiar with Jameson's high intensity continuous training, this is what that is. Slow, heavy for a long time to get the adaptation. And that's it for the muscle fiber adaptations.
Excellent. Great. Any thoughts on this? And one other question that's come in is like, how would some of this tailor towards a track cycling? And Thompson, that might be a little bit more for you as well. So which one of these would they probably be tailored more towards?
Yeah, well, that brings up an interesting point. So a lot of these protocols are focused on conditioning. So they're basically implying submaximal intensity in the sense that even if you are doing some more abrupt sprints, if you're performing a series of them, none of them are going to be truly maximal. So it might be supramaximal in sense of the power or heart rate zone that you're getting into, but it's not necessarily going to be a true equivalent of like a 1 rep max in the gym type effort. So with track cycling, a lot of it comes down to neuromuscular coordination and then the ability to sustain a relatively high output for sprinting specifically in an anaerobic nature. So developing peak output and then lactate capacity. For something like this, where you're working with a sport that has a much longer playing duration, so if you're preparing an athlete for baseball or football where the game's going to last an hour or more, and you need to be conditioned enough to produce a bunch of repeated high-intensity efforts, that's where these protocols come into play. So if you're trying to produce a bunch of 3 or 5 second efforts over and over again at a super maximal power zone, but not necessarily a true maximal output, that's where this will take place.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Great. Anything else you guys want to add before we go into the assessments? And again, anybody that has any questions on this, additional questions, you can send them now or at the end as well. And I just got a note that Ryan had to jump off, like we told you at the beginning, he had to run to the airport. So any other questions you have for anybody, you can send to us at the end. Oh, there he is. With your mask and all. So.
Yeah, for you guys.
All right. So what I'm going to do is just go on to the, just talking briefly before we get into the last of the questions here. We got about 15 minutes left here. I do want to talk a little bit about the assessments that the Wattbike offers. And Thompson, if you can give us a little background on, there's the 3-minute one, and then the stages as well, the ramping stages that we had discussion on last week with Steve. So just give us a little feedback on those.
Absolutely. So as all of us have mentioned so far, training intentionally is the most important thing. Without intention, it's hard to create the desired outcome. So the Wattbike has a bunch of fitness tests built into it. Those tests include a maximal ramp test, which is like your traditional VO2 max test, We have a submaximal version of that, which allows the rider to take it up to a perceived exertion of about 70% or 85% of their max heart rate, and it projects the final stage that they would be able to achieve in a maximal ramp test. Or we have the 3-minute maximum minute power test. And the 3-minute maximum minute power test is the max sustainable pace. It's a steady state test for 3 minutes. That should be equivalent to the final stage that you're able to achieve on a maximal ramp test. The reason you would take one of these tests is purely to determine your power profile and your training zones. So by taking one of these tests with a heart rate monitor on, it'll allow you to determine your maximum minute power, and it'll allow you to determine your maximum heart rate. And the Wattbike, for all future workouts and programs, will take percentages of your max heart rate and maximum minute power to dictate future workout intensities.
So, and I'd like to bring Steve in on this, and I'm not sure if Ryan can as well, but I'm also looking for an assessment like this that we can do throughout a season to look at overtraining, fatigue setting in. What would you think? Is it the 3-minute a little hard for that high level, and maybe for different sports it might be okay, but if not, then would one of those submax ones work better?
Yeah, I'll turn this back to Thomson, but for me in the settings that I've been in for the past 10 years or so, the submax test would work really, really well to be able to as a test that you could use throughout a competitive season to track fatigue, fitness degradation, etc. For sure.
Because that submax test, Thomson, that's like 7-8 minutes long? Is that correct?
Ideally, it should be about 10 to 14 minutes, but the minimum for it is 6 stages. So you have to complete at least 6 ramp increase increments until you get some valid results from it. So it could theoretically take place over a shorter period of time if you set it up that way. You can either use a standardized starting power target and standardized ramp increase increments, so the power target will just increase every minute on the minute, or you can set it up off of the normative data that's provided within the Wattbike Hub app, where it gives you a recommended starting point based upon your unique demographic. So your age, your gender, your fitness activity level, and your body mass.
Okay, great. And then just some power tests as well. I know Ryan had mentioned earlier the 6-second that they're using even as part of a workout, but there's 6-second ones, and then there's some sport specific ones in there. What's the big difference between that we have? What's the difference between the two that are different ones out there? What's your benefits that you see in the power? Either Thomson or Steve?
Steve, I'll let you start on this one.
Sure. Well, I'll take it, maybe go in a different direction with this, and then just based on my own personal experience. From a power standpoint, what I've most seen and experienced and done in professional basketball, a lot of counter movement jumping on force plates. So I feel like this is a great way to complement that testing, that repeated testing, without the associated biomechanical stress of jumping on your feet. I mean, these basketball players, for example, that's all they do is jump and run in season, right? So sometimes it doesn't make a lot of sense to give them more of that. So this 6-second power test potentially becomes a really nice option when you want to see maintenance or degradation over a competitive season, and you want to eliminate some of the joint forces that they're getting tons of through their player development work or practice or gameplay.
Absolutely. And if you're using it as a complement to force plates or even a bar velocity tracking device in the weight room with a barbell, the peak power that you see within a peak power test on the Wattbike is going to occur within about the first 1 3/4 revolutions. The reason the test is 6 seconds in duration as opposed to 3 seconds is because it allows the user to wind up to peak cadence at that same resistance level. So that's something that was developed through the talent identification protocols that we have in place for cycling. So they wanted to see not only how much power an athlete could produce, but how quickly they could turn their legs over once they get up to speed. But in elite sports, especially ball sports and field sports right now, we're seeing a trend where they start to omit the final few seconds of that peak power test and just test the peak power off of those first few revolutions. You'll still get the absolute peak within the first couple of seconds. So whether you want to impose the fatigue from winding all the way up to peak cadence or not is dependent upon the rest of your training program.
Great. All right. I think we're going to finish up here. We've got about 7-8 minutes left, but I got a few questions that have come in. So I want to start off with the first question here. A lot of bikes that are out there. Okay, there's clients that are riding in their gyms all the time, but they're just riding. What are 3 avenues to help move people to understand how to use the numbers? So instead of just the one number, or actually 2 numbers that Thomson brought up before. One is time. Most people just get on a bike and just say, I'm going to go for 30 minutes, not even really paying attention to anything other than that, other than possibly calories. But besides calories, how can we get people to, start understanding these watt numbers and these power outputs are more important? Any thoughts on that? It's a question from one of the attendees here.
Yeah, well, each training intensity is associated with a direct physiological adaptation. So for example, zone 4 is the threshold development zone. So if you spend a lot of time there, that's going to help you develop and push up your threshold. But that's not necessarily the zone where you're going to burn the most fat. So if you're going for a body composition change, you should be conscious of the intensity that you're riding at and try to spend more time in the zone that's going to produce the best result based upon your goal. So be intentional with the training. Take one of the initial fitness tests so you are able to define parameters for each training zone. And then once you have those parameters, train within the appropriate zone to develop the desired physiological response.
So
Yeah,
go ahead.
No, I was going to add to that. I mean, unless you're a long distance cyclist or a long distance runner, that may be your thing, obviously, and you may need to do those types of bouts every once in a while. But I would just say the time commitment that's from an interval training standpoint, with strategically trying to hit certain metrics, will be a lot less for your average everyday client, and to get the same benefits, if not better benefits, with lesser time commitment should be an important thing for them to see, to kind of push them to not just riding for 30 minutes per se and just looking at calories burned, but to looking at the different types of metrics that the Wattbike offers, percentage of maximal heart rate, power, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that the time commitment to see the changes in their body, whatever the adaptation they're looking for, is a good motivating factor.
And we just had a text-in question from Eric Weber of Woodway, asking about why it's important to spend time within a particular heart rate or power zone as opposed to just riding as hard as you can. This goes back to one of the earlier slides that Steve had put together regarding the energy sources for each particular intensity. So if you're training at a relatively high intensity or training in one of the upper level power heart rate zones, the fuel source that you're using isn't going to be the same as it is when you're exerting yourself at lower intensities. So it's important to define those power and heart rate zones to determine the fuel source that's going to be used to propel those efforts. Because if you're just going as hard as you can, or if you're trying to burn those 20 or 50 calories as fast as possible, chances are you're using a fuel source that probably won't be best for the goal that you're trying to achieve.
Plus, it's not sustainable, right? I mean, acidosis and hypoxia is not a good thing repeatedly over a long period of time. That's going to turn tissue into and to tissue that you don't want in your body. It's gonna cause breakdown over time.
Excellent. I think this will be the last question that we have here. Just real quick. So there's a new Wattbike out for the consumer. What's that? What's the name of that?
So Wattbike has a few new offerings available, which are smart bikes. So we have the Atom, which is the residential bike, and the Atom X, which is the much more robust commercial grade bike with a few additional bells and whistles. And ultimately, there's a very different riding sensation between one of these smart bikes and the traditional air-resisted Wattbike. The beauty of the air resistance is that it provides a continuous resistance to push against. So as you pedal faster, the fan basically pushes back a little bit harder, which really helps facilitate proper pedaling mechanics and technique. By having some air resistance to push against throughout that entire 360-degree concentric revolution, it develops a little bit better ability to push with a proper index of force effectiveness throughout that entire revolution. The Atom and Atom X are smart bikes, which basically are able to have the resistance automatically manipulated by a third-party software platform. So you can perform course simulations and do some e-racing. But once you wind up to speed on those bikes, you don't necessarily have the same load to push against, and the training effect is going to be slightly different. So those particular models are fantastic for steady state riding, ramp testing, but not necessarily the best for hit training and sprinting, where these really abrupt and aggressive intensity changes are required.
Okay, because here's the question that I got from a listener here. What is the most resistance that can be applied to the Atom versus the original Wattbike? That's the first part of the question. So what's the most resistant?
The Atom is magnetically resisted, and it can take you up to about 2,000 watts of resistance. Now, on all of the Wattbike models, the power meter will read practically infinitely. So you can still hit over 2,000 watts instantaneously on either the Atom or the Wattbike Trainer, which is the light load model that's rated for 2,000 watts. However, you won't necessarily be able to sustain over 200 or 2,000 watts for an extended period of time, but most people can't do that anyway. You're generally looking at a fraction of a second.
Okay. And okay, I think you asked what is new and what's different. What's possible to set up the resistance for a gear ratio perspective? What is possible to set up the resistance for a gear ratio perspective and from the Atom?
So when it comes to gear ratios, it's more of a power cadence resistance relationship style scenario. So rather than having a specific gear, what we're looking at are designated loads and cadence correspondence that equates to a given power output. So I believe I received an email on this from the same gentleman earlier today, and I can send out additional information on that. But essentially, the Wattbike has resources available that'll allow you to choose a resistance and know that if you're pedaling at this cadence for an extended period of time, you're going to be producing roughly this much power.
Excellent. Okay. Well, that takes us right to the end of the hour here. So again, I appreciate Thomson and Ryan, who had to step off, and of course Steve for all their information and obviously the slides to help us through it, Steve. So I don't know if Eric is still on, if he wants to say any words at the end here. If not, what we have is just this is the information. If you have more questions, you can contact info@woodway.com. And we did record this, so Tracy will be sending out to anybody who was on and who has signed up for it, the recording. So again, thank you guys. Great job.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Paul.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.